Welcome to the lifestyle segment of Women to Watch. I'm Cheri Morrison. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to filmmaker and author Jennifer Lin. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Hi, Cheri. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Jennifer, you were born and raised in the Philadelphia area. You studied journalism at Duquesne University and are now married with 2 grown children. You were a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer for 31 years, with postings as a financial correspondent for Wall Street, a national correspondent in Washington, and an international correspondent in Beijing. You stepped away from the Inquirer in 2015 with the intention of exploring a new way because you wanted to tell stories in film and words. I love that. You've completed 2 books, a documentary, and are currently working on 2 documentaries. If you would please touch briefly on the 2 projects you are most proud of finishing after leaving the Inquirer. Your book, Shanghai Faithful, a family memoir you started in 1979, and the production of the documentary Beethoven in Beijing, which you started filming in 2016. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, well, thank you, Cheri. You're right. I left the paper in 2015 because I wanted to try new types of storytelling. And my father is an immigrant from Shanghai. And in 1979, when I was still in college, he took us to China to meet his family that he left behind. And that really planted the seed. I mean, I just became, over the years, just really focused on finding out my family history. I worked at the Inquirer. I was able to do many magazine stories about my family in China because I traveled often to China, and I was based there for a few years in the 1990s. And, you know, after accumulating so much information and research, I decided to write a family memoir. And Shanghai Faithful, I look at 5 generations of my father's family in China. And what makes them interesting and unique is they were Christians. So what I did is I went back basically to the first convert, who was a fisherman in the province of Fujian. And through the story of my family over 150 years, you really get to know the history of modern China, but through a story about the characters in my family. My grandfather was an Episcopal minister. He actually spent 2 years studying at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I was able to publish Shanghai Faithful in 2017. And then my other big project was the documentary Beethoven in Beijing. And, you know, it was the very day that I left the Inquirer that I went to the orchestra and I pitched to them the idea of doing this movie because the Philadelphia Orchestra has this tremendous legacy in China. They were the first American orchestra to perform in China. And I really felt that this was a story about the United States and China that not many people knew. And I felt like this was a story that really should be seen and heard, not just read about. So I asked them about making a movie and they agreed. I ended up partnering with Sam Katz, who has a company in Philadelphia called History Making Productions. And Sam and I spent 5 years putting together Beethoven in Beijing. And we premiered it in 2020. It was a virtual premiere. We had expected to show it at the Academy of Music, but we all know what was happening in 2020. So we had a virtual premiere, but I was really, thrilled with that. And it's a movie that continues to attract audiences.
That's fantastic. And I think it also premiered in 2020, and that was Beethoven's 250th birthday anniversary, isn't it?
It was, yeah. And I forgot to mention it was on PBS's Great Performances. So it got a national broadcast, which was thrilling.
Yeah, and you had some great write-ups after that. I think it's interesting you wrote the book after you produced the film. It usually works the other way around. And I understand with any information gathering project, even with this little program, and you covered so much more, there's a lot of information that gets filtered out that I think is still really interesting and relevant. Is that why you decided to write the book?
So the book was actually my COVID project. Like all of us, I was kind of stuck in my office. And I decided to mine my research and to write an oral history. I had so much research that I had done for the movie that didn't make the movie. So I did additional interviews, collected more information, and published through Temple University an oral history of the Philadelphia Orchestra's tour of China in 1973. The orchestra shared with me their archival photos. So there are 100 photos in the book. And that came out in last year, actually, this time last year.
Hmm. And this is kind of an off the direct topic. I know Eugene Ormandy was one of Nixon's favorite conductors, and that's sort of how this story came about with the Philadelphia Orchestra going to Beijing. Do you know if his daughters Patricia or Julia have seen the documentary?
I don't know, but we did have a screening of the movie at the Nixon Library in
Oh, wow.
California. So hopefully they've seen it.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So moving on, let's talk about one of your new projects, Beyond Yellowface. It seems timely as it shines a light on the persistence of anti-Asian stereotypes in ballet and explores current advocacy work to make ballet more inclusive. Please tell us what inspired you to create Beyond Yellowface.
Sure. Actually, it was an idea that my daughter brought to me, Corey Steig. She was a dancer, a very serious ballet dancer when she was growing up. And she shared with me this book called Final Bow for Yellowface by a dancer in New York named Phil Chan. So Beyond Yellowface really looks at Phil Chan and Gina Paskogan and their advocacy in trying to eliminate racial stereotypes from ballets. They've had an incredible impact in the world of ballet. They have created a space for a conversation about how people of different cultures are represented in ballets, some of which date back like 100, 150 years. So the film will look at Gina and Phil and the work that they are doing to kind of bring attention to the issue of representation in the arts. So that's in production right now, and I'm very excited about that. I love the world of ballet, and this is not about cancel culture. It's about making culture, classical culture, more expansive, really. So that hopefully will come out sometime next year.
Wow, I can't wait. And from what I understand, 10 Times Better, your even newer project, emerged from your work on Beyond Yellowface when you discovered George and his story you became somewhat obsessed with finding George and learning more. Um, you sent me a little clip of what you've done so far, and the only problem with the clip was it ended, and I can't wait to see the whole story and everything you've put together. Please tell us a little bit about the incredible and almost secretive life of George.
I love this story, Cheri. I've spent 40 years as a reporter, and the story of George Lee is really one of the most compelling that I've ever come across. I was doing research on the Nutcracker because Phil and Gina, a lot of their advocacy focuses on the Nutcracker and how kind of you portray Chinese dancers in that. And I was in the library in New York and I saw a photo of the first dancer who did the Nutcracker for George Balanchine in 1954. And it was a Chinese dancer. And I thought, wow, he must have had an incredible career with the New York City Ballet, but he never danced for them. And he didn't dance for anyone, any of the big ballet companies. And I became obsessed with finding George. And I found him, and he's an 88-year-old blackjack dealer in Las Vegas. And I went out there once to film him. We're returning in a month, and I was able to ask George, you were a phenomenon in 1954. You had just come here as a refugee from Shanghai in 1951. You were 18 years old. Why didn't you dance for the New York City Ballet? And he said, oh, they told me I was too short. But there's a happy ending to this because Gene Kelly, the famous Gene Kelly, was directing Flower Drum Song, and he cast George in the original cast of Flower Drum Song. And so George went on to have a very full and successful career as a Broadway dancer. But really, the George story is a story about an immigrant, a refugee from China who came here and through perseverance and grit really made a life for himself and was a real success. I mean, he was the first Asian to dance with the New York City Ballet.
Oh, it's such a wonderful story. And I understand how you became so obsessed with this amazing piece of ballet and dance history. I mean, I can't imagine Gene Kelly like saying to me, because I was such a big fan of his. I love Broadway and musicals. I can't imagine him like bringing George into that uh, light and making him a part of so many famous shows. It's a great story. So what's next? Finishing your projects? Do you have anything new on the horizon?
Well, I hope to finish the George story 10 times better this year and hopefully bring that out to the world next year. And then we're also working on finishing up Beyond Yellowface. And that will be a longer project because it's a full documentary, and George is the 10 times better story is only a short documentary. So I'll be busy in the editing room, Cheri, for the next few months.
Well, that's great. And just so people understand, 10 times better, I think, came from his mother, who was a ballet dancer, very famous, over in China and Russia and maybe Poland. And she told George when he started dancing that if he wanted to amount to anything, he had to be 10 times better. So what a great thing for your mother to instill in you.
Yeah, and the reason was they were refugees from China. And so she told him, "You're going into a white world and you must be 10 times better."
Yeah.
And he that embedded in his mind.
Wow. Smart, smart, smart. So you do speaking engagements, and I see you're going to be interviewed this coming weekend, the 26th at 3 p.m. by David O'Reilly after a screening of Beethoven in Beijing in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And on April 4th, you'll be speaking at the Philadelphia City Institute branch of Free Library on Rittenhouse Square. Do you have any other big engagements coming up?
I do one at the University of North Carolina and also at Hong Kong University. They've invited us out there. The nice thing about Beethoven in Beijing is there is real international appeal as well as interest in the story beyond just Philadelphia. So those are two on the calendar so far. So
Um,
join me in Hong Kong.
I would love to. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your time and putting all of this amazing history together. What an interesting career path you've had, and you've kind of pivoted a little bit, but continued with what you're good at. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheri. I enjoyed the conversation.
Sure. If you're interested in purchasing either of Jennifer Lynn's books, they are available on Amazon. If you have any questions for Jennifer, you may contact her by email at jenniferlynn1100@yahoo.com. And her last name, Lynn, is spelled Lin. Or you may Google either of the two documentaries, which are still works in progress, to see if there are any upcoming screenings. Thank you again. Sue will be right back to close out the show. Ladies, keep living your dreams.